Hi, my name is Gabriel Dylan and I am the author of YA horror Whiteout, which is a story about a bunch of sixth form students who go on an ill-fated trip to Austria to a little village in the middle of nowhere, and they find they're not alone out there, and they get trapped in the snow and they get chased by all sorts of strange creatures. So I thought today, as a bit of a Halloween special, I'd tell you a little bit about how I wrote Whiteout, a little bit about what I think about when I'm writing a horror story, and how I try and bear in mind the monsters I'm going to write about and the setting that I'm going to sort of use in my story. Before I can do that, I need to tell you a little bit about Whiteout, where the ideas came from, and that might sort of give you a little bit more of an insight into how I started the writing process. So Whiteout actually came from a series of true events. Luckily, there was no monsters in there, no mayhem, no murder. But what actually happened did inspire the idea behind the story of Whiteout. So I'll give you a little bit of background about where the idea came from and how it sort of came about. So when I was younger, I lived by the sea, and living by the sea, I surfed every day. Surfing was my hobby, the thing that sort of kept me sane when I wasn't at work or school, and I really loved surfing, really enjoyed it. And then the picture you're looking at now, I'm about 16 on that one. I've just come out of the water, and at that point, I'm very sort of addicted to surfing. And then as I got older, and I realised I had to get a proper job, and working as a surf instructor wasn't quite going to pay the bills. So I decided to move inland to become a teacher, a secondary school teacher at a big school not far from Bristol, just down, just up from Bristol in Gloucestershire. So I moved inland, and when I moved inland, I really missed the sea. I missed being able to surf every day, and it started to drive me a little bit mad. And I was driving home from work one day, I noticed this huge dry slope, a big ski slope, which was just right by my school, really. And somebody told me that if you can surf, you can snowboard. So I thought, you know what, I'll teach myself to snowboard. So every night after work, I'd pop down to this dry slope, and I'd get lots of bruises, lots of bumps. But eventually, I started to get my head around snowboarding, and it started to click a little bit. I started to really enjoy it. And then a few months later, the school I teach at they were running a trip to Austria, a ski trip, and they said, "Well, you can snowboard. You're getting the hang of it. Do you want to come along on this trip? Do you want to run it?" And I thought, yeah, that sounds pretty good. I've never been on real snow before, but it sounds like a lot of fun. So I said I would, and I hopped on board a coach with about 50 sixth form students, and we headed to deepest, darkest Austria, to a little village called Hocker in the middle of nowhere. And it was a 27-hour coach journey. It was no fun at all, the coach journey. But when we got there, the place was incredible. This huge, snowy sort of wilderness. It was on the top of a mountain top. There was only one road in, one road out, and it was really stunning, really beautiful. And as the week went on, we all started to ski and snowboard and just really fell in love with the place. And then about sort of day 2 or 3, a huge snowstorm came in, and it shut the resort down. It meant that nobody could really go out, you couldn't go skiing or snowboarding, and you were trapped in this little village in the middle of nowhere. And it felt like going back in time. This place had no mobile phones, it had no internet, and we really were sort of cut off, and all there was to look at was this beautiful snow that was coming down. And one night I sat on the balcony and I was looking out at this little village, and I sort of thought, what if there's something out there? What if there's some kind of monster out there, something that's sort of watching us and waiting to kind of sort of come and prey on us, and it's got us trapped here. Now it's gonna get us in some way. I know it sounds like a really sort of silly idea, very kind of far-fetched, but I've always had a really crazy imagination. And once the idea came to me, I couldn't get it out of my head. I thought maybe this is a story I should sort of try and write. I'd always written stuff. I'd always tried to kind of make it to write a book. It never quite happened. I'd always sort of given up halfway through or lost the sort of will to finish it. But once this story got into my head, I just couldn't put it down. I just knew this is a story you've got to try and write. So luckily the snow did lift, the storm did lift, and we managed a few more days of sort of skiing and snowboarding. And the rest of the trip I took lots of photos, and I thought about what good setting it would make for a book. And I really thought how I could use this setting in my story. So on the coach journey home, another 27 hours at the end of the trip, I started to plan it all and think about the kind of characters I could have in there. And by the time I got home, I was brimming with these ideas and just desperate to start writing. And I think because I work with teenagers, I love teaching. I teach English, and I love working at a secondary school. I think it gave me these ideas of how I wanted to write for a young adult audience, so that kind of audience of maybe sort of 13, 14, 50-year-olds, because it's such an exciting time in your lives, and I just thought this is who I want to write for. And I read a lot of young adult. I read things like Half Bad, I read the other Red Eye range, sort of Savage Island and Fur and Frozen Charlotte. So I love those sort of books. I've always loved horror, and I thought, right, I'm going to try and write a YA horror based around my experience. So I read a lot of horror when I was younger, Lots of Stephen King, lots of other authors like James Herbert. And I still read a lot of horror now. I really enjoy horror. And I think for me, what I look for in a horror book is a really powerful setting, one that can really kind of inspire me, and one that's atmospheric, and one that I can really sort of believe in. So luckily, when I started to write Whiteout, I had this setting made in my mind. It was already there, this deserted ski resort in the middle of nowhere that was all snowed in, and that students couldn't escape from. So I had this sort of custom-made setting in my mind. So when I started to write, I thought about the senses. I thought about this place, this little fictional town that the students were trapped in, and I thought about using those senses to construct the story. So I thought about what the students could see, this amazing sort of snowy wilderness. I thought about what they could hear, the crunch of the snow under their feet, the sound of the wind and the blizzard. I thought about the other senses, so the cold that sort of bit into their bones, and the various kind of things they could kind of feel, the emotions they feel as well. And all those senses fed into trying to make this location that bit more sort of authentic, that bit more sort of real. So that would be my first bit of advice if you're writing a horror story. I think about where you're going to set it, think about making that setting almost a character in its own right, and think about bringing that setting to life. Think about using your senses to really bring it home to the audience, to really sort of show them what the place is like. And that would be my first bit of advice if you're writing a horror story. Really think carefully about the setting and think about bringing it to life. Now, the other thing I think about when I'm writing a book is that my goal, my chief sort of goal really, is to scare the reader. And to do that, as I said, I read a lot of horror when I was younger. I still watch a lot of horror films now. I love horror. I love being scared. And I think for me, I think about what scares me. And that's my sort of starting point. And I scare pretty easy. Lots of things do scare me. I love Stephen King books, so things like It, I really enjoyed. I love witches. I've got a very soft spot for witches, the scary witches. I find those quite sort of creepy. As I said before, Charlie Higson's The Enemy book, I like zombies, zombie apocalypses, the idea of being alone, being trapped somewhere. I find that quite scary. But for me, the one thing that's always scared me more than anything really is vampires, and that comes from when I was about 13 or 14. A few of my friends, we stayed up late and we watched a program, a film called Salem's Lot, based on a Stephen King book about a town that's taken over by these vampires. And that there was a clip in that where this scary vampire kind of pops up from nowhere, and it terrified me, really scared me, really sort of stuck with me. So when I started to write Whiteout, when I thought that I wanted to play with the vampire mythology a little bit, Salem's Lot really sort of fed into it. And the idea of these really scary vampires that just want to eat people and that are really sort of savage, and that kind of really fed into what I wanted to write. So I wanted to make sure that I really scared the reader, and the creatures that I invented aren't strictly vampires. They sort of play with the vampire mythology, and more importantly, they really kind of scare the reader. So I think if you're writing horror, think about it right from the offset, how you're going to keep those scares coming, and how you're going to slowly sort of drip feed the scares in, and then suddenly throw your reader straight into the action. That'd be another key tip for writing horror. Okay, so in a minute I'm going to treat you to a Halloween reading of a bit of Whiteout. So I'll read you a little bit of it. So as I've said, it's about a bunch of students that are trapped in a ski resort in the middle of nowhere. It's based quite closely on what happened in that some of the characters are based on students that were on the trip. So those that annoyed me on the trip, I thought I might kill you off quite early in the book. So it's based on this trip, sort of fictional. Obviously, didn't really happen with vampires and things. So you've got several characters in this. You've got the main character of Charlie, and I think again, if you're writing horror, you want to make sure the reader kind of really cares about the characters. That's a really sort of key thing. So my main character is a kid called Charlie. He is a sixth former, and he's had a really sort of tricky existence. He's had a sort of life where life's beat him down a little bit. It's not been particularly kind to him. But he still tries to do the right thing. He tries to be the best sort of person he can, and he finds himself the sort of unlikely hero amongst his small band of survivors. My other main character is a girl called Hannah, who is an Austrian girl who works at a ski resort, but she's got a secret, and she is one of these characters that as you read it, hopefully you're sort of wondering if she's involved in things or not, and she knows a little bit about the resort, and something's brought her back there to try and find out the truth about this strange sort of resort where bad things seem to sort of happen. And then you've got a cast of other characters in there. You've got a slightly older ski instructor called Stefan. When the teachers initially go missing, he tries to sort of help the students and to try and kind of guide them along. And then I think I thought about the various stereotypical students that I come across in my day-to-day teaching. So I've got the sporty student in there. I've got the sort of gossip in there. I've got different kind of characters that I sort of come across, different sort of stereotypes. So I tried to sort of put them in there and have this kind of melting pot where they're all sort of forced to get along and to survive. So what I'll do, I'll read you a little bit of this. Before I do, I think we need to wait a little bit just so it gets a little bit creepier. So it's a little bit dark and a bit creepy for Halloween setting. So give me a few minutes and hopefully the lights might go out. Okay, so I've got my ski jacket on, my ski hat on. I've got the candles lit. The bats are floating around somewhere, so it sounds like it's the right time for this spooky chapter of Whiteout. So in the bit I'm going to read you, it's quite early in the book still. The students in the ski resort have woken up one morning, the storm's come in, they've woken up and all the teachers have gone missing, so the students are quite sort of scared about where the teachers have gone. All the adults have gone too, they explored the ski resort and there's nobody there at all, the place is totally deserted. So Stefan and Hannah, Stefan's the ski instructor, Hannah is the Austrian girl, spend the day exploring the resort and there's nobody there, nothing, the place is deserted. So they sit down in the evening, it's just going dark, and Stefan has come back to the hotel to tell the other instructors to tell the other students what he's found out and what's going on, but he's got no answers for them, and the storm's raging outside. This is where the action kind of starts. So, chapter 9, page 64. They were sitting in the hotel lounge, the last of the light long gone from the sky, when a dull, insistent pounding on the door stopped Stefan mid-sentence. Several of the girls screamed. One of the rugby boys swore the word loaded with fright, and then it came again. Thump, thump, thump. Stefan looked like he was on the edge of exhaustion. He stood by the fire, dripping on the carpet, hollowly reassuring them that everything would be all right. Tomorrow, he said, somebody would be on their way. Tomorrow the internet would be back on, and they'd all laugh about what had happened. Charlie sat at the back of the dimly lit room, measuring the disbelief on the faces of the students around him. He was pretty sure that Stefan himself didn't believe the words he was saying, and then the noise had cut him dead. Thump, thump, thump. It sounded to Charlie like a bear's paw knocking on the glass, a heavy, mindless pounding. Oh no, please, is it the teachers? A girl called Amy whispered the words from amongst the pinched, scared faces gathered in the Dowley Alpine bar. She rose out of a chair, looked down towards the hallway, and quickly sat back down. There was a scrape as Ryan pushed his chair back, but Stefan held up his hand decisively. No, I'll go. Stefan started to walk hesitantly to the lobby, dark rings under his eyes. When Charlie thought about it later, when he considered what had happened to the students who had been sitting just next to him against the glass of the dining room windows, he couldn't have said why he got up and went after Stefan. But when he looked back later that night, he realised that it must have been one of the most important decisions of his life. By the time he got to the entrance that led to the lobby, Stefan's fingertips were on the door that led out into the storm. The guide, Hannah, was standing next to Charlie, an uncertain light in her grey eyes. Charlie jerked as Ryan's large hand came to rest on his shoulder. The rugby captain pushed him gently to one side so that he could see what was happening. Stefan looked back for a moment at them, his face confused. There's nobody there. There's nothing. Charlie studied the television static of the world outside, his mouth dry. Nothing moved beyond the door, but a constant, steady fall of snow. Stefan turned back to face the blizzard, and then the whole door blew inwards in an explosion of snow, glass, and ice. Stefan screamed as the debris engulfed him, and everything seemed to slow down. Charlie saw something dart into the lobby, a tall, thin figure, fast and dark. It moved so quickly that he barely registered it. 1 second Stefan was there, amidst a feverish cloud of debris, and the next the shape wrapped itself around him. Charlie just had time to make out a set of dirty, taloned fingers folding themselves into the thick mop of the instructor's hair, and then both Stefan and the intruder vanished back out into the storm. Nobody had time to even move. At Charlie's shoulder, Ryan was shouting the instructor's name frantically. Hannah was frozen with stock still, her eyes wide with disbelief, and then there were more screams. This time they came from inside the room at their backs, coupled with the sound of more shattering glass. Charlie turned to look back into the dining room, 2 frenzied girls pushing past him. He stared past them and tried to process what he saw. All around the room the curtains were billowing in amidst a blizzard of glistening shards of ice and snow, and quick figures were darting in, embracing the students nearest to the windows and stealing them back out into the storm. Other members of the party, those lucky enough to be sitting away from the windows, streamed past Charlie in the direction of the lobby, their faces pale with terror. Charlie watched as a screaming, red-haired girl clung to the arm of a chair by her fingernails before being torn away and dragged out into the darkness. He couldn't make out what it was that took her, and he wasn't sure he wanted to. Okay, so hopefully that reading might have inspired you a little bit, might have creeped you out a little bit, and might have given you a bit of a Halloween scare, and maybe made you want to read more. So I will leave you there, and hopefully I look forward to reading some of your horror stories and seeing how you've incorporated setting and character and atmosphere. And I'm on Twitter, so if you ever want to send me any of your stories, I'd love to sort of see them. So happy Halloween, and I will see you all soon.